They call them Slavs, modern Serbs, descendants of great migrations, warriors of the south. But hidden beneath the flags and folklore is a contradiction that no textbook ever warned you about. Because the most common male bloodline in Serbia, carried by nearly half of all Serbian men, isn't Slavic, not even close. It's not from Ukraine, Belarus, or the steppes. It's I2A1 P37.2. And it was already here before the wheel, before farming, before even the idea of nation existed. This bloodline walked the Balkans 20,000 years ago, when glaciers still carved through Europe and the Neanderthals had just disappeared. While most of Europe was buried under ice, the Balkans held refugees of the Paleolithic world, small clans of hunter-gatherers who never left. And somehow, their sons are still here. The highest genetic diversity of I2A isn't found in Russia, or Poland, or even Northern Europe. It's found in Bosnia, in Serbia. That means this lineage didn't migrate in, it originated here. Generation after generation, through war, empire, famine, and faith, it survived. The Roman roads came and went, the Slavic language spread, the borders of kingdoms shifted like shadows. But the male bloodline, this single Y chromosome, was passed down, uninterrupted, from fathers to sons, across 400 generations. At the Iron Gates, along the cliffs of the Danube, scientists found ancient skeletons with the same DNA still present in Serbian men today. No empire could erase it. No migration could overwrite it. This is not the story of a people being replaced. It's the story of a people whose roots were so deep, others built their identities on top of them. So here's the twist that geneticists couldn't ignore. This Balkan bloodline, older than the Slavic language, older than Slavic culture, somehow became the genetic core of what we now call the Slavic world. How? How did a Paleolithic lineage from the mountains of Serbia become the signature marker of a people who arrived 10,000 years later? Because before Slavic migrations ever touched these lands, before bronze, before empire, another world had already written its code deep into Balkan soil. It wasn't carried by soldiers, but by farmers. And what they brought wasn't war, it was civilization itself. 9,000 years before any Serbs existed, Balkan DNA was already shaped by empires, but not the ones you think. They didn't march with flags or armies. They came quietly, from Anatolia, from the heart of the Fertile Crescent, where humanity first learned to cultivate life from the earth. Around 6200 BCE, small groups of settlers crossed the Aegean Sea, stepping into the fertile valleys of what we now call Serbia. They brought wheat, barley, goats, and a secret carried in their blood, the Y-DNA haplogroup UNB1B-V13. That single lineage, born in the hills of the Near East, would forever alter the genetic map of the Balkans. Today, nearly 17 to 18% of Serbian men still carry that same paternal signature. It is the living mark of Europe's first farmers, the men who turned wilderness into civilization. Archaeogenetic data from Lepenski Vir and Vinča, two of the most extraordinary Neolithic sites in Europe, reveal this merger in biological detail. Ancient bones show a dual ancestry, local I2A hunter-gatherers and incoming E1B1B agriculturalists. This means that 8,000 years ago, two worlds met, and instead of conquest, there was coexistence. The newcomers introduced plow-based agriculture, domesticated livestock, and even proto-urban settlements. They also carried new Y-DNA lineages, G2A, JEG2, T1A, and maternal haplogroups, H, J, and T, genetic echoes that still hum through modern Serbian blood. From their arrival came the Vinča culture, 5300–4500 BCE, centered around the Danube basin, a civilization older than the pyramids. It gave Europe its first copper tools, its earliest symbolic script, and temples aligned to celestial movements. In their DNA and art, archaeologists find a stable genetic continuity, proof that these Anatolian farmers didn't replace the Balkan tribes. They merged with them, creating a new population, half ancient hunter, half Neolithic innovator. Even through later upheavals, Bronze Age migrations, Thracian and Illyrian shifts, this deep genetic blend remained the foundation of Serbian ancestry. Scientists from Harvard's Reich Lab, 2023, confirm that modern Serbs still carry one of Europe's highest proportions of Neolithic Balkan ancestry, a direct legacy of those early farmers who built without destroying. And yet, peace never lasts in human history. Because while these first farmers spread bread and stone far beyond the horizon, a different power was rising. They rode not with seeds, but with metal and flame. But while farmers brought bread, another wave was bringing bronze and fire. They didn't plant, they didn't build, they arrived like a storm, not to settle, but to dominate. The Bronze Age brought Indo-European warriors, but in Serbia, their bloodline lost to a much older legacy. By 2000 BCE, the game had changed. From the wide-open steppes of Pontic Caspian Ukraine, a new force swept across Europe, the Yamnaya. They brought with them the wheel, the horse, and the Y-DNA haplogroups, R1a and R1b, lineages that would reshape the genetics of nearly every region they touched. In Germany, they became the corded ware. In Britain, the Beaker people. In India, they fused into Vedic elites, and in most of Europe, their DNA dominated. But not in Serbia. In a stunning twist, modern Serbs still carry more I2a and E1b1b, the older Balkan and Anatolian signatures, than the R1a or R1b brought by the steppe. It's the genetic reversal of what happened everywhere else. Why? Because while the Yamnaya expansion hit the Balkans with full force, with 30–80%, steppe autosomal DNA entering between 2000–1200 BCE, something strange happened here. Their blood arrived, but their fathers didn't stay. Archaeologists have found the signs: chariot burials, horse tack, bronze weapons, even steppe-style burial mounds. Cultures like the Vuchedol, Dubovac, and Belegish show clear Indo-European influence. But when researchers dug deeper, literally, they found that the Y-DNA of those buried men didn't match the dominant R1a or R1b seen elsewhere. The local I2a still held its ground. The old Balkan patriarchs had not been replaced. Even in regions touched by Bronze Age warfare and elite shifts, the steppe lineages never took over Serbia the way they did in Western or Northern Europe. The ancient blood, the kind already rooted here for millennia, remained stronger. Scientists from the David Reich Lab and the Max Planck Institute confirmed this resistance. Serbia retained one of the lowest R1b frequencies in all of Europe, despite deep Indo-European cultural layers. It was as if the body of culture shifted, but the bones of ancestry stayed the same. So the real conquerors of Serbian DNA weren't the warriors on horseback. So who truly changed the genetic map of Serbia? Not Rome, not the steppe. It was because even after 1,000 years under Roman rule, the empire that built cities and roads left almost no genetic trace behind. Serbia was under Rome for 1,000 years. So where's the Roman DNA? The banners flew, the legions marched, and the Danube, once wild, became Rome's northern wall. By 15 CE, Serbia was Roman. From Upper Moesia to Viminatium, emperors rose, roads stretched like veins, and Latin became law. For nearly a millennium, the empire ruled these lands. But here's the contradiction that stunned geneticists. Rome ruled Serbia's land, but not its blood. When researchers sequenced ancient remains from Viminatium, a military metropolis housing tens of thousands, they expected to find Italic DNA. Markers from Latium, Etruria, Campania. But they didn't. What they found was something else entirely. The male lineages showed no strong Italic signal. Instead, they revealed a patchwork of Anatolian, Levantine, North African, and even East African ancestry. Haplogroups like E1b-V32, more common in Somalia and Sudan, and mtDNA L2A1J, typically found in sub-Saharan populations, started appearing in Roman-era Balkan graves. These weren't Roman senators or Italian settlers. These were auxiliary troops, foreign-born slaves, and multi-ethnic traders pulled from every edge of the empire and stationed at its frontier. According to 2023 ADNA studies from the Petnica Science Center, by the 7th century CE, up to 23% of genetic input in Serbia traced back to Asia Minor and North Africa, not Italy. The empire had poured its culture into the Balkans, but not its genetics. Rome's conquest was skin-deep, monumental, visible, but never biological. The language changed, religion evolved, cities grew, but the ancestral Balkan DNA, the I2A, the E1B1B, held firm beneath it all. Rome may have conquered maps, but it never colonized the genome. And just as its control began to fracture, a new silence was descending from the forests of the north. Not chariots, not togas, but something colder. But while Rome brought order, chaos would come from the north, riding in silence. That silence wasn't empty. It carried voices, not of conquerors, but of settlers. And the twist? They were strangers to the land, but not to its blood. Slavs didn't erase the Balkans, they fused with it, and they brought Balkan DNA back home. This wasn't a blitz of swords, no burning cities, no mass genocide. When the Slavs entered the Balkans between the 6th and 8th century CE, they didn't erase what was here, they absorbed it. But here's the paradox. The people we call newcomers were already carrying the DNA of the place they were about to settle. Start with the numbers. Autosomal DNA studies from the Petnica Science Center, 2023, and David Reich's lab at Harvard show that modern Serbs get 50 to 60% of their total ancestry from these Slavic migrations. It was a major demographic shift. But look closer, specifically at the Y chromosome, the paternal lineage. You'd expect it to be dominated by R1A, the classic marker of Proto-Slavic males, and it's there, but only 15 to 21%. So, where's the rest? That's where the twist hits. The dominant Y DNA in Serbian men is still I2A PH908, the same deep Balkan lineage traced to the Iron Gates, to Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, to the Vinča and Lepenski Vir cultures. But it didn't survive by hiding. It traveled. It moved north long before the Slavs came south. Ancient DNA from Ukrainian burial sites, dated between 200 BCE and 400 CE, shows that I2A had already merged into early Slavic populations before they reached Serbia. The Balkan genome had quietly infiltrated Proto-Slavic tribes centuries earlier, through intermarriage, trade, captives, and shared frontiers. So when the Slavs returned to the Balkans, they weren't bringing foreign genes. They were bringing Balkan blood back home, a reverse migration that rewrote identity without erasing roots. This is why Serbian genetics feel both ancient and Slavic, because Slavic identity was a cultural shell, layered over deep Balkan ancestry. Language changed, names changed, but the bones remembered. And yet, that leaves one haunting question. If the Slavs weren't the original bearers of this land, and the blood they brought had already come from here, then what do we call the people who lived here before the Slavs, but still live inside us? To answer that, you don't follow the conquerors. You follow the mothers, because while borders changed, the wombs of this land never left. Where men change, mothers endure, and Serbia's maternal DNA reveals a forgotten ancestry. Empires rise and collapse. Flags wave, then fade, but deep beneath it all, the mitochondrial line, passed from mother to child, unbroken, remains the quiet chronicle of truth. And, in Serbia, the story told by mothers is far older and far more rooted than anyone expected. More than 43% of Serbian women today carry mtDNA haplogroup H, one of the oldest maternal signatures in Europe. But it's not just the dominant type that matters, it's the rarer branches, the hidden signals, that expose a deeper mystery. Haplogroups I5A1, R0A1A5, and even L2A1K, found in trace numbers across Serbian regions, link modern families to Anatolia, the Levant, and even North Africa. These are not new arrivals. They're ancient whispers, lineages that likely entered the Balkans over 8,000 years ago and never left. A major 2025 genomic study from the Serbian Institute of Molecular Genetics confirmed something astonishing. R0A and I5, once assumed to be Near Eastern imports, likely originated and diversified in the Balkans themselves. This means the genetic mothers of Serbia didn't just survive, They shaped the ancestry of the wider Mediterranean world. And unlike male bloodlines, which rise and fall with conquest, shifting with every migration, maternal lineages carry the deep culture. The foods passed down through generations, the rituals held in kitchens, the lullabies whispered across centuries. Women didn't just pass on genes, they passed on identity. You see it in the family trees preserved by oral tradition, not through surnames, but through grandmothers, not through territory, but through memory. While kingdoms collapsed, the mitochondrial thread remained unbroken. In every rural Serbian village, in every line of preserved poetry and dance, the mothers of the Balkans still speak. But their deepest secret wasn't found in tombs or cities. It was tucked away, silent, untouched, in the highlands. But the greatest concentration of ancient DNA wasn't in Serbia's cities, it was hidden in the mountains. And those mountains? They weren't just tall, they were impenetrable, walls that memory and blood could retreat behind and never be fully touched. One forgotten region preserved the DNA blueprint of a people under siege. When the world collapsed, this place didn't. The Dinaric Alps stretching through Old Herzegovina and into western Serbia are not just landscapes, they're fortresses made by time. And inside those ridges, something ancient survived, long after it vanished everywhere else. Modern genetic surveys reveal a staggering anomaly. In certain highland populations of Old Herzegovina, the Y-DNA haplogroup I2A PH928 reaches frequencies of 45.8%, the highest known in any Slavic group today. That's not an echo. That's a stronghold. Historians long believed the Balkans were endlessly invaded, endlessly changed. But this one mountainous refuge tells a different story, not of replacement, but of retreat and preservation. A genetic sanctuary carved into stone. During the Ottoman expansions, while cities were burned and lowland populations displaced, the highlanders endured. And even before the Turks, during the Byzantine chaos, the Avar waves, and the Slavic upheaval, the Dinaric highlands absorbed those fleeing war, keeping their bloodlines clustered, isolated, unbroken. This is where the founder effect takes hold. A phenomenon where a small group, cut off from the wider gene pool, becomes genetically amplified across generations. And that's exactly what happened here. From this single mountain cradle, entire communities later migrated eastward, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, repopulating war-torn Serbia after Ottoman withdrawals. This is why so many central and northern Serbs today share not just a language, but a strikingly similar genetic profile. It's not randomness. It's a post-medieval echo of a Dinaric origin, a ripple from a refuge. And while this explains the homogeneity, it doesn't explain the origin. Because if the Dinaric region preserved the ancient bloodline, then where and when was that bloodline born? But what if I told you the foundation of this bloodline was carved in stone over 8,000 years ago? Because long before empires, migrations, or mountain refugees, there was a river, and in one cave beside its current, the oldest ancestors of Serbia left their silent signature. The oldest human DNA ever sequenced in Serbia comes from a riverside cave, and it's still alive in you. They lived without kingdoms, without written words, just spears, fire, and the river. Along the Danube, near today's Serbian-Romanian border, lies a rugged gorge called the Iron Gates. For most, it's a forgotten landscape, but to geneticists, it's a time machine. Inside those river-carved caves, bones were found. Mesolithic hunter fishes, untouched by farming or metal. When those remains were sequenced, what they revealed was staggering. The people of Lepenski Vir and Vlasak, who lived as early as 8000 BCE, carried 85% Western hunter-gatherer DNA, a legacy of Ice Age Europe, fused with 15% Eastern Eurasian ancestry, likely from ancient contact zones even older than Slavs or Greeks. Their mtDNA lineages, K1U4H6A2B, are not extinct relics. They still appear in modern Serbs today. This isn't poetic language. It's scientifically confirmed genetic continuity stretching over 10,000 years, from stone hearths to living families. These weren't farmers. They weren't city builders. They were fishers, Riverbound clans who carved statues, honored the dead, and survived in a world that had no maps, no borders, no Serbia, and yet they are Serbia. Because their daughters, across thousands of silent generations, passed on unbroken mitochondrial chains, from cave to cradle, through every era of war, empire, and silence. In their DNA, we find the roots of identity before identity had a name, but something even stranger has begun to surface. As these ancient signatures are tracked, not just in the Balkans, but beyond, they're showing up in places no one expected. Because sometimes ancient bloodlines don't just stay home, they travel. And now, that same ancient DNA is showing up somewhere completely unexpected. Not in the Balkans, not even in southern Europe, but in the frozen north, where longboats once ruled, and swords were buried with secrets. In the cold soil of Sweden, archaeologists found Balkan DNA. How did it get there? The grave was typical for a Viking. Sword, shield, warrior stance. But the DNA? Anything but. At Birka, Sweden, one of the most iconic Viking Age sites, scientists expected to find Scandinavian genetics. Instead, they uncovered mtDNA lineages linked not to Norway, but to the Balkans. Specifically, haplogroups like H6A2, I5A1, and K1A, types we've traced to Serbia's Iron Gates and Neolithic highlands, appeared in warrior graves thousands of kilometers away. And this wasn't an isolated fluke. At Salma, in modern Estonia, 2 Viking ships were unearthed with the remains of dozens of men, warriors buried with weapons and honor. Among them, Y DNA subclades overlapping with Balkan-associated markers, especially I2A1b, the same lineage dominant in modern Serbs. So how did it get there? Not through conquest, but through complexity. Historians now believe that between the 8th and 11th centuries, Viking trade routes ran deep into the Slavic south, stretching through rivers like the Dniester, Prut, and Danube. Along these routes, there were captives, yes, but also allies, traders, and mercenaries who fought alongside Norsemen across Europe. Some of those men and women carried Balkan blood, and when they died far from home, their bones told a story their names never could. It's proof that Serbian genetic history didn't end at the mountains or rivers. It reached into Europe's coldest corners, carried by bodies, forgotten by books. And maybe that's the real twist. Ancestry doesn't respect borders. It travels with memory, buried in blood. But if Balkan DNA made it into Viking graves, then what if we now traced these Balkan bloodlines all the way to America?